Good day, everyone. My name's Aaron McIntosh. I am the Director of Product Marketing here at ActZero. And joining me today is Adam Mansour. Adam is our vCISO and Head of Sales Engineering. He's got about 15 years experience, if not more, in cybersecurity, working on endpoints, cloud network. And we're here today to talk CMMC. So that being said, I am going to pull up our slide deck and we're going to get going. I'm hoping everybody can see the slides. Give me 1 second. Perfect. Okay, so 2 weeks ago, it was early into the evening on November 4th. The day had gone really well, and we had closed some deals, some great opportunities. Suddenly, we start receiving word about some changes coming to CMMC. There was a short-lived post put up by OUSD that was quickly taken down, but that stirred a lot of questions within the industry. We don't know exactly what caused this. We do know we were expecting changes to come. We know that the OUSD had received about 850 comments on CMMC 1.0. We believe that from that, based on what we're reading on their website and sessions we've been in, it really boils down to three reasons why they're making the changes. One being that, moving to CMMC 2.0 and all the changes within there will really help businesses reduce their costs. And this is really particularly important for small businesses who may have found the process very cumbersome or even exclusionary. Number two, the department wanted to increase trust in the CMMC assessment ecosystem. And number three, to help better clarify and align cybersecurity requirements to the federal requirements and other common accepted standards. Now, we'd anticipated the changes, as I mentioned, but like others, we didn't know exactly what was going to come of it. We had a ton of questions in terms of why now? You had a deadline of December 9th. What are those changes and what it means to us? So without panic, Adam and team took some time to go and digest the materials that were out there, attend the CMMC AB sessions and others. So on that note, we're about to jump into those questions and have the conversation with Adam. But before we do so, for those audience members that are live with us today, if you do have any questions, there are three tabs at the bottom of the screen. One is the ability to submit questions, and we've left lots of time at the end to get to those. Two, there's a tab for attachments, anything that we're providing during the session. And number three, there is a rate us section at the bottom as well. So on that note, Adam, help us break down CMMC 2.0, starting with what organizations still need to do.
I'm going to start off by saying that a lot of people who had DFARS requirements did not have them go away with this change. I think a lot of people need to just quickly, readjust for, what was always a requirement, would have legal liabilities and potential contract loss for them if they were, storing things like FCI and CUI and they were not meeting those requirements. But I'll start very quickly here with point number one. Point number one is that CMMC 1.0, as it has existed, including the audit guidance, is now suspended, right? And that means that for a 9 to 24 month period, as they look to create new rulemaking for how this will essentially become CMMC 2 and eventually part of contract requirements, essentially there are no CMMC specific requirements that are going to be put into contracts during this period, which means we're basically in a holding pattern for this to become the new standard that's required. But I want to be very clear when we get to point number two here, that does not eliminate your requirement to do NIST 800-171, depending on the data you have. As a matter of fact, this has always existed independently of CMMC. And so part of the commentary and definitely alignment with the standard within NIST is something that they're trying to connect, because they weren't ever eliminating the DFARS requirements. What they were using was NIST as a starting point and choosing to augment CMMC 1.0 to include different processes and frankly, a little bit of an alteration to audit guidance for some of the practices as well. So while CMMC 1 was different than NIST 800-171, it included a lot of familiar clauses and it had asked for more things about them. And so now they're basically saying, to point number 3, that when 2 comes out, we are going to align with NIST 800-171 and NIST 800-172, so that you are basically satisfying, both requirements at the same time, and they're not deviating from the DFARS or FARS clauses that are already part of doing business with, the DoD. Number 4 is that, a lot of people are wondering, where the, adjudication is going to come from. How am I going to comply with these requirements, right? For many years, the DFARS requirements were submitted through self-assessment, right? You kind of told your primes or as part of the contract, anybody who was asking, here's the existing, mapping we have to this in sort of just plain language. Spreadsheets, ExoStar, other portals always existed to upload your information to. And so now when you think about the certification requirement, which was going to get a third party, the C3PAOs to come and audit these companies across the board for CMMC certification in version 1, we now have a different set of requirements for version 2, meaning that, level 1, now that they've condensed the levels, both the C3PAOs and the government can audit you depending on what kind of CUI data you actually have, which we're going to get into in just a sec. So that is sort of the mainstay of what you still need to do. You should understand that you should not be doing CMMC 1.0 in this rulemaking period. You instead should focus your energy on the DFARS requirements you already had to map to NIST 800-171 and 172. And we're going to show you just exactly how to do that. But expect that when 2.0 comes out, depending on your CUI data, CMMC 2 will be part of contract requirements once that rulemaking is put into force. The other thing we kind of walking through is, a lot of questions of what will happen to the certification and stuff. We're going to get into a lot of those other questions as we go through.
Yeah. In terms of the self-assessment, do you know how regularly or how frequently they're going to happen? For like level 1, level 2, or 3?
Yeah, when we go through, annual requirements for 800-171, it will apply to level 1 and a subset of level 2. Level 3 and part of level 2 requirements will require a triannual audit, which will either include the C3PAO or the government, the contracting body themselves.
Perfect. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later on as we go through. So the next big question is, we kind of have an understanding of where we are. How's that going to affect the timelines?
Originally, one of the goals set up by the CMMC AB and, of course, OUSD were to try to get everyone in the DIB, certified by 2026, right? And so, as you started to look at a lot of the training materials, what they were coaching us on was that they were going to have this sort of very gradual ramp period throughout the next couple of years. Obviously, the suspension changes the targets for the actual certification itself, right? And so, the timelines have not necessarily changed. We don't know if their goals still are to meet 2026, and that the refractory period we have now, where they're looking at this rulemaking period of 9 to 24 months, is that to make it easier to make sure you hit the targets. Because a lot of the assessment guidance and a lot of the comments are just, a lot easier in something like NIST 800-171, and a lot less gray, right? And of course, not having to go through a third party to get your assessment done means they can probably hit the goals of meeting that CMMC certification without, having to certify assessment bodies and all these other things for a large number of DIBs, right? So, that's what I'd say about the compliance. But let's break some of these points down on the slide for everybody. So, NIST 800-171 is and always was a requirement for people storing CUI. The timeline for that is, years ago for those of you on the phone that have this requirement. Similarly, right, when we think about FCI, level 1 data, FARS clauses, as you might have remembered them, you've been doing probably a self-assessment against this already. And so, to the third point about 2026, right, do we know if this new timeline has changed? Who knows if the idea is that they're going to keep the original timeline and use the refractory period to make it easier for everybody to hit it, or are they going to, extend the timeline, right? Mm-hmm. Beyond that, you have obviously, contract requirements. So, when you say contracts will not require a certification, right, because there won't be third parties that are actually certifying people in the rulemaking time, you have about 9 to 24 months where you can expect that no contracts will require your CMMC certification. It should be very clear, though, that whether it's written in the contract or not, if you have CUI data, DFARS clauses always apply, right? And so we want to make sure that you understand that there are False Claims Acts and the Christian doctrine and other illegal ramifications, liability ramifications for not following the standard if you have CUI today.
Yeah, and for those who you may be new to the game and have questions about FCI and CUI, within our tracker that we'll be providing at the end of the session, there are links to that into the breakdown descriptions as well. So the next question is, you talked about the CMMC AB and RPOs and C3PAOs. Let's chat a little bit about that. How have these changes affected the timelines, affected the certification requirements, training, and the like?
Well, I'm going to say that, obviously there was a bit of a surprise. There was a town hall meeting, I believe a week or so ago from the CMMC AB, where a lot of the administrators for the program, the CEO himself, a lot of those people that had worked really hard to build the training program around CMMC 1 and started to get those provisional assessors and the people actually receiving, their designations. A lot of people had spent, thousands of dollars to join the program. There was probably about 2,200 people on the call and about 450 plus comments in the channel. And as they laid it all out for us, basically some of the major elements that affect the program are on the slide here, right? So what the expectation was for the C3PAOs was that there'd be a certification exam sometime near the end of the year, where a lot of them could finally, get their credentials to start conducting these assessments. For the people that already had their credentials, that were already CAs that we were talking to, at ActZero, a lot of them were sort of in a holding pattern, waiting for a green light to actually go and assess. And so that's all now been kind of canceled for them, right? Extended into the ether. They're not sure exactly when the CMMCAB.org will publish the 2.0 requirements, or when the OUSD and then the CMMC pairing their information to get people trained on it will begin again. But the premise is that they want to try to get the new standard up and ready in a few weeks, right? And then it'll probably be many weeks from then before C3PAOs and RPs like ourselves are given training materials and new test requirements to make sure that we are in line with those changes, right? So that essentially is what happens to the program. However, for many in the program who were already providing things like FedRAMP consulting or working with NIST 800-171 requirements with customers, the idea is still the same, right? It's not like there's a restriction in participating in helping clients getting their NIST 800-171 self-assessment together and helping them collect evidence and explain these clauses or controls. But obviously, as this becomes more solidified over the next couple of months, we're expecting that there'll be more of a maturation of how to adjudicate, just like the professional code of conduct and other things we had to work through with CMMC 1 extending to 2.0.
Okay, and we're still part of our role is always a guide as well. So I think part of this process is we're still learning as we go along. We're finding out additional information. You're going to go through additional training. For those who are attending today, we'll provide this information as we move forward as well on a regular basis. You'll probably receive some updates from us. Keep an eye on the website as well. We'll be constantly updating our materials there. So one of the biggest changes to this is the assessment process. Being able to move to to self-assessment, but it also means that there's been changes in the control structure. Before we had 5 levels, now it's 3. So let's walk a little bit through that process for the attendees, starting with that self-assessment process. Can you walk us through that a little bit, Adam, and the steps in that, and what's the pertinent things that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think that for many people on the call, this is almost eerily similar to the GDPR deadline, where I think a lot of people may have let things lapse in terms of their meeting of the deadline. But I just want to be very clear that you should understand what controlled unclassified information and federal contract information are and that, it's not a lot of, contracting agencies or other responsibilities of the people that you're bidding with to explain those things to you, right? There is an understanding that whether you write it out of the contract or put it in the contract or notify people, it is your responsibility to understand whether you are exchanging this information between parties. And if you are, that there are DFARS regulations around you meeting a certain level of cybersecurity protections around it, right? So the link here in the first bullet is about just being able to understand what controlled unclassified information actually is. And so there's a lot of references to different types of information that you can sort of peruse through that'll help you basically, self-diagnose and say, okay, do I actually have, CUI data? If so, where and how much of it is there multiple categories that I have? How big is my enclave in terms of where this stuff is? So you can start to take stock of this requirement. The second one is that, when you think about FCI, there was always clauses that mapped to NIST 800-171. For CMMC 2.0, right, I think that if you're already kind of collecting data and you're wondering if the 17 practices are the same as CMMC 1 or if they're the same as the FARS clauses, and you're really just looking for CMMC 2 self-assessment guidance, you probably can wait until they publish the standard in a few weeks and try to answer your level 1 requirements there. Yep. But certainly for people in level 3 requirements and 2 requirements, right, it's now you start to have to think a little bit like they are trying to for enforcement. So if you think about point number 3 here, if you think you have CUI data, that's not just the end of it, right? And so one of the distinctions between being assessed by a third party, being assessed by yourself, and being assessed by the government is actually whether or not your CUI data represents a critical or highly sensitive, category, and those aren't labeled yet, right? Mm-hmm. So how does an agency know that if they're making, if they're a chicken farmer and they're supplying a forward operating base, is it critical information because an increase in supply may be somebody that is very important is visiting the base, right? Is that critical information to protecting the warfighter? And so obviously we could examine a lot of scenarios where there's potential for harm. All right, you're potentially in a highly sensitive area in collection. But as a rule of thumb, we know that at least level 2 is NIST 800-171 and the level 3 is 800-172, right? So as a piece of guidance, it's good to know and assess where you are with both of those now, if you have CUI data. And then as they start to, as part of contracts and as part of the 2.0 rulemaking process, become much more prescriptive about what high and critical are, so that you can get a heads up that it's you or it's not you, you're more prepared, right? Yeah. And one of the other components in preparation here is that, certainly the idea that you are going to meet all of the requirements for a long time as people self-assessed was not always the expectation, right? I think a lot of people were using their system security plans, their POAMs that defined a kind of resource project budget timeline to achieving the gaps that they may be missing. And the guidance that they've given us is that in 2.0, once rulemaking is in effect, they will still include a capability for certain requirements that haven't been met when you're actually applying for a bid to be submitted with a POAM. So you can say, look, I'm not all the way there, but if I get the contract, there's a period of time that I can use to close these gaps because it's now, I guess, financially beneficial for me to do that now that I have this contract. They're also going to include a couple of requirements that at their own will and discretion. That is, sorry, I'm getting a bit of an echo. Aaron, are you hearing that? No. Okay, great. They're also going to include certain requirements that will not be able to be, addressed via POAM. So it is going to be very subjective. If you think about point 3 and 4 here, I think it's lack of clarity that we're getting here on exactly what our requirements are. So obviously the guidance and lack of clarity is just, make sure that you understand that the spirit of this is to protect your data, to protect your systems, and that if we do these things, they are going to help us as a business, as well as help us in contracting down the road, and that we should probably use these guidelines to measure ourselves anyways, and try to use this in the spirit it was designed, was to protect us. So check out all the requirements.
Perfect. We're going between mute and unmute, so bear with me. Yeah, so that's a really important, question 4. I've actually gone and done some studying as well, and it seems that this is actually opening up the opportunities a little bit for the SMB market as well, who may be a little bit more immature in their controls, and they don't necessarily know what they need to know at the end. So I'm happy to see that as well, because so much of our base is SMB in the mid-market. Okay, so the next is, let's get into the controls a little bit. Obviously, we know it's not a one-for-one, level 1, 2, 3 doesn't necessarily go over into a certain level in CMMC Model 2.0, but can you walk us through this a little bit? This comes directly from the OUSD, this slide.
Yeah, I think one of the unfortunate things that has happened as a result of changing the standard very rapidly and delisting some of the guidance from CMMC 1 is just how many legal firms and education providers and contractors and things that have put guidance out on the web. I think if you actually Google CMMC DFARS requirements, you're probably going to get a lot of old information and misinformation as a result about what's required, because a lot of that indexing on the internet just takes a long time to update. Even our own blogs, we have to go back and sort of put the red ink on. But as this slide obviously makes the rounds in a lot of other guidance from what's happening with 2.0, you can see just how much it mirrored FARS and DFARS requirements of old, right? That when we think about level 1 and self-certification and FCI, right, federal contract information only, you have the 17 practices that they were very close to the 17 that were in level 1 of previous, right, of CMMC 1, but even in the DFARS clauses, right, or FARS clauses. Level 2, of course, you have 110 now, right, which obviously collapses what seems to be the old level 3, right? A lot of what level 3 was all about was protecting CUI data. You started to see people talk about, as you got to like the old level 4s and 5s, start to talk about things like controlled technical information, design information, which those agencies almost always know that they're dealing with the very, very sensitive planes and plans that are they're checked on much more regularly. But when you think about level 3 and CUI data, that was where a lot of people, especially in the SMB and mid-market, were targeting their certification, right? Very few conversations even provided audit guidance for level 4 and level 5. So it was almost not even inked completely for people to even understand how to audit themselves on 4 and 5, nor had there been any CAs, I think, that got that certification. And somebody can correct me here if I'm wrong on that, but I didn't meet any. On level 3, obviously this is where it collapses sort of 4 and 5. So now you can start to see where it becomes a little bit more subjective, where you have to sort of analyze yourself and say, well, if I'm at level 2 and I've got CUI data and I'm doing 800-171, on the one hand, right, you can have an annual self-assessment, right, like it says in the bullet. And if it's critical to national security, right, I might have, third-party assessments, which may include a C3PAO, right? At level 3, you start to see a non-distinction between CUI there and saying, okay, well, you could be NIST 800-172 required, and it's a triennial government-led assessment, right? So that's obviously a very different, design than the previous one, which was that the C3PAOs would certify you on every one of these levels as they became, aware of the audit guidance. So now we have some self-assessment, we have some third-party assessment at C3PAO, and some government-led assessments for the higher levels. So, and the unfortunate part is that there's no NARA or archives.gov database of the types of CUI that are or are not that, right? And even when you try to interpret whether you have FCI information, it's a little vague, right? You have to go out there and read the bullet points we're going to give you in a minute, and you'll see any information exchanged and all this other stuff. So it's pretty wide blanket.
Yeah, and the CMMC level requirements, that's basically based on the contract itself, right? So,
yeah, I think when obviously when you go through contracting, again, they won't write down these clauses in every case,
no.
right? And then they're not even necessarily the ones that are putting them in as contract clauses. So the other part that's hard to see here is that these requirements always exist even outside of contract, right? They exist as part of the DFARS clause for any procurement that happens. And even if you said these clauses don't apply to us, if they apply to you because of your holding of GUI data, you still have liability for something like false claims and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, so perfect. So moving ahead, so next steps. The big question always it comes is, we're professionals in the space. You're an we're RPO. How can we help? What are the tools that we have that can assist those on the line?
Yeah, I think people are seeking information, right? First and foremost, right? They want to make sure. I don't think it's because of any type of misalignment with the objective. I think everybody wants to keep their own business safe. I think everybody wants to protect intellectual property. They want to protect the warfighter, the homeland. They want to do these things, but they're starved for accurate, objective, simple information. And right now, Googling is not going to help, right? So I think we have to almost assert ourselves and start making it easier for you to see this stuff and read it and understand it if you're a customer or if you're not. And so, as an RP, which doesn't hold a lot of weight anymore if 1.0 is what we were interpreting for you, but certainly before, for our defense customers, aerospace customers, other customers, in the supply chain, our job was to make sure they understood how to secure themselves with controls, right? So for this specific liability, for this specific risk, much like privacy risk that affects our customers, we're going to keep ourselves, ear to the ground. We're going to make it as simple to provide people updates as they want, and webinars like this, materials like we're about to go through, and Q&A anywhere we can, so that we're not, stage gating this information, paywalling this information, or in some way trying to obfuscate it and say, oh, it's so difficult, you need to go through us. We think we should be present and useful to help you understand this stuff. So that's job number one, is that by the end of the month, when there's a 2.0 posted on the OUSD, we're going to try to make it as simple to collect the audit guidance and the assessment and anything else that we can use to kind of point you in the direction of how to help you document this stuff. And certainly, number two is that we're obviously going to shift back to the NIST guideline, right? There's always a NIST guideline. We were always using the NIST guideline. We will continue to use the NIST guideline for DFARS requirements, and now CMMC 2 readiness simultaneously. And of course, if the CMMC AB or the OUSD decide to change the NIST guidelines, we're going to update it, just like we're going to update you on any changes that we see to publications of those documents, right? Like 2 and the old ones. Third, for customers, right, our vCISO service maturity, we're still going to align to this. We're still mapping to this. You still have to do this. We still have to do this. So we are obviously going to use those sessions to assess our customers. This might make it easy for those people who were using this just as a benchmark, right? A lot of customers hardening against data loss and ransomware. We use this standard successfully to design their networks to be resilient to those attacks. And anybody listening on this call that is in financial services, or they make something that doesn't go to the defense industrial base, is probably wondering how this applies to you. It still applies in terms of hardening your systems against attack. And the last one is sort of a forthcoming statement, and is that as our commitment to versioning the controls that we assess within our portal. So for customers of ActZero, you have a portal that we use to exchange everything from the vulnerability information to other types of threat escalations, and of course your own adherence to these best practices, frameworks, and compliance standards. And so we're going to make sure that we amend that, like we do everything from CIS to others, to maintain once 2.0 is published, to make sure that it's up to date.
Perfect. Now we are about 30 minutes in right now. Let's talk resources. So we're going to leave 3 with you today for all audience members. We have the framework tracker, which Adam's talked about, and actually, Adam, I'll have you go through that in a couple of minutes. We do have numerous blogs up on the website. One that we did thought would be helpful will be, how does CMC help with multiple compliance certifications? And then we also have our incident response guide in there. We've had a lot of traction on that. A lot of customers find it extremely useful, and it does apply to a number of the controls within CMMC 1.0 and 2.0. So take a look at those. But Adam, while we do have some time, I do want to get to some some audience questions a little bit later. But can you take 5 minutes or so to walk us through the framework tracker?
Sure. For those of you that are online now and can obviously access this, just FYI, we are going to update this so that, as things change, if anything changes to these requirements, you'll see the current version of them there. So what's live is the current version as of, today. But I will share my screen and we can just quickly dive into the sheet itself, right? So when you get the sheet, our job is to make this as simple as possible, right? We're not here to judge if you didn't, know there was FCI or CUI requirements, or you're worried that you do have them, right? Our job is, first, as a disclaimer, that we're not a law firm, right? We are a technical managed detection and response company who has customers that have these requirements. And so we want to make it very easy to make sure that both them and us are complying with these regulations. As the updated tracker is, published, it'll be here for you to link. So you can always get a fresh copy when it's amended. It'll be a little more dynamic for you. But the first instruction, obviously, is that, outside of understanding what these requirements are, which are just sort of extra resources below, the job is to look at the controls and try to answer the questions very basically, right? In a self-assessment, this is how you do it. You would, and still can, download the latest NIST 800-171 standard. You very likely will take it out of the PDF format so that you can start using it. And so that's what we've done with this tracker to make it easy for you. We've taken both the 171 and 172 requirements, which apply to people with CUI data, which may be, level 2, level 3 requirements. And then each one of the controls is sort of listed here. And the way to, work with this is just to answer the questions, right? So when you're assessing this for yourself, the MEP guidance, the audit guidance for NIST is actually a lot more straightforward than the former audit guidance of CMMC 1.0. It's a lot more specific in the standard and included a little less, but certainly makes it easier for people to work with, right? So what we're encouraging you to do is, of course, start answering the questions one by one in the cells so that you have an answer to whether or not you are over complete or incomplete, partially, or reviewing this, with your submission in mind, right? So as you answer these questions, right, they also say specifically what kind of documentation or systems or something you can get this detail from. Over here is a helpful sort of business case. If you feel like, the requirements for things like log management and advanced endpoint, indicators of compromise, dark web monitoring, vulnerability scanning, and remediation, if those things are sort of, still in flight for you as a provider, I think one of the things you can do is take a look at this column H and just say, hey, can ActZero or an MDR actually help me address this, right? And so as you go through them, it'll kind of say, well, maybe I'm not doing it, and then you can kind of understand whether or not you have somebody you can call here that can help you doing that.
Yeah, and for those wondering where you can download the form, we did have a question come in the attachment section tab at the bottom of the presenter, at the bottom of the screen. You'll be able to get the link there. Additionally, it is on our website under the resources section. So we'll have that available to you. And if you can't find it, please do feel free to reach out at info@actzero.ai and we'll make sure to get it to you as well. Perfect. So awesome. Thanks, Adam. So we are at, we've got about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to pop up the slides again. And hopefully everyone can see them. As we toggle, sometimes they do drop off. Okay, so as I mentioned, these are the resources. So before we do that, some of the questions that we do have, we have 4 that have come in here. So let me take a read through these. The first is, does prioritization include CUI or CNSI only, and are they the same thing?
So if you look at the older guidance for CMMC 1, as you started to look at federal contract information, CUI was the one that they had mentioned having 800.171 DFARS requirements. There are other acronyms to define other more very specialized data, right? That is not necessarily in scope for this. But they're all very related, right? If you go to the archives.gov and look at CUI specifically, you can see almost like a blending of where like it is FCI, it is CUI, and it could be CTI and other types of information simultaneously, which means you are increasing the protections and the requirements to try to safeguard that information. Right now, FCI and CUI are the only things mentioned across the CMMC discussions. And certainly, I don't pretend to interpret every one of the FARS clauses or DFARS clauses, just the ones that, are discussing, FCI and CUI. And so that's what this framework is entitled to do. So if you have other requirements, maybe some of those things you might extend to like a legal team to find out for you, because you definitely don't want to mess around with that kind of liability.
Okay, thank you. The next question here is, will non-certified contractors be able to be awarded new contracts? CMMC 1.0 stated they wouldn't be eligible.
Sorry, Aaron, could you repeat that? I just got lost in who was certified and who could apply and who couldn't apply.
Yeah. So, will non-certified contractors be awarded new contracts?
Right. So yeah. So for the rulemaking period, it's important to understand contract award is not contingent on you certifying. There is not a certification that is available to you, and therefore, in the rulemaking process, as they have suspended one and are going to two, they are not going to withhold any bids from anybody who is not certified as part of this process. However, when you are awarded these contracts, you have the liability of FARS and DFARS clauses, and have always had that, assuming that you are, exchanging this information. So while they award the contract to you and you self-assess like you had against the DFARS requirements the whole time, you're not certified and not held, you're not, awarded or not awarded the contract based on your certification. After the fact, you have a liability and a potential breach of contract that can occur because you didn't follow the NIST 800.171 standard. Much like GDPR, right? There was a deadline to be, compliant. There was not a certification body that made you compliant, but there was an ICO office in Europe that fined you if you were found to be, almost like a whistleblower program, which is exactly what we have here. There is a whistleblower program. People who blow the whistle get 10% of the liability they collect from people who are false claim acts, right? And this has happened to Cisco and Microsoft and others, right? You still have that liability, right? So that's why you want to self-assess, because much like GDPR, they're going to come and look at how you've interpreted these articles that they had and say, yeah, you were negligent. You didn't do any of this, or you didn't interpret it properly or something. That's the liability. Mm-hmm. But they're not going to hold back contracts if you're not certified and you can't get certified. So let's just start with the answer to that question.
Yes, I know there's a lot of nuances, and it's not a simple yes or no answer to any of this stuff, right? So the next question I have is, this one's fairly specific. Are we AC.2.016 maps to NIST 800.171 3.13? Won't these just become CMMC 2.0 level 2? Yeah, I've already done does that carry forward? I think it's probably the gist of the question.
Aaron and I have blown our brains out mapping the CMMC to virtually every potentially applicable cyber check that you can think of. In our old tracker, we had FedRAMP, ACE, I think we had HIPAA, we had PCI, we had CIS. We had anticipated that because of the comments, there was going to be some reform, and that the bodies that were contributing that reform were going to source from some materials. Yeah. And I agree with you and disagree with you in the same breath, because while we had prepped for any and all eventualities that what 2.0 would be was an amalgam of some of these things, and wanted to know where we and our customers stood on all fronts, we don't know what the CMMC 2.0 standard is until it's published in a few weeks. That might mean that will become 800.171, 872, ACE, become the requirements. Maybe it won't, right? We're still waiting on them to publish.
Yeah, and we've got about 4 minutes left, so I have one more question. There are lots of manufacturers that 100% of, say, NIST 800-171 or 171A. What documentation changes will be dealt with in like tier 2, 3, 4 supply chain? That's a tough question. So,
what kind of documentation will be changed for tier 2, 3, and 4 supply chain? If you mean by tiers, you mean subs to a prime. So you're saying like there's a clause here and you work for like Lockheed or Raytheon or Northrop Grumman or somebody, and you're just a supplier down the stream. You make a screw that goes into the tank that is then going to this, warfighter. The idea is that the entire defense industrial base is you exchanging this information. Right. So the concept is that even if you're a one-person contractor that works over here and you are exchanging the information, you are part of the enclave now. Your subs are part of the enclave now. And so I've seen consulting companies being issued laptops by these organizations that have to maintain this standard to exchange CUI data exclusively on that machine that is still part of their enclave. It's always VPN'd in, and they have all the monitoring and all the clauses addressed on that workstation. And then they have a separate workstation where they just do their regular job. Right. So, when you think about the downstream contractor, and I'm sure this was part of the comments, I haven't, I other than them, right? They don't send the comments and publicly post them from what I've seen. So I don't know that this wasn't one of the major things, which is, do I have to be compliant if I'm just the guy that shows up on the shop floor to drop off a package that has the screws in it because the logistics information show you where the factory is? Like, it just gets really, really extended. So the goal by 2026 was the whole DIB, which was everybody in that sphere. But the exchange of that information in the enclave was always how they were trying to sort of set the bounds of the scope of your certification. And I want to be even more gray on this, if you were commercially off-the-shelf software, like Office 365 and GCC High, you got an exemption from having to do it, right? That was another clause that I think a lot of people were like, well, when am I off-the-shelf software? Is ActZero off-the-shelf software? I'd say arguably we're not, but that's the kind of thing that we don't come off the shelf very easy. So that's what I'd say to that.
Perfect. Thanks. We are almost out of time. I think we have we're just about a minute or so left. So Adam, thank you very much as usual. I love doing these webinars with you. I learn all the time. For those audience members, if you do have any questions, I think we got to all of them that were in the queue. If you have any afterwards that you're thinking of, please do send them to us at info@actzero.ai. We'll get to them as soon as we can. As always, take a few moments to rate us. Was the material up to par? Did you get the questions answered that you were looking for? We're constantly improving. We want to make sure that we're hitting these out of the park for you and that you're finding true value in them when you come. And additionally, thanks for joining us today. Hopefully we helped you out in your journey to CMMC, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.